Hey class, so I thought it would be a good idea to go back over some of the material we did in lecture yesterday and maybe do a couple of examples, because it's one thing when you see me doing things on the slideshow, and it's another thing when you actually see what's done to solve problems. So I've got a copy of chapter 4 here, and I can thumb through and we can take a look at, we can maybe review our supply and demand curve here for nurses. So here is how we can actually go about looking at problems of these type. So the way, let me see if I can adjust this a little bit here. So the way you want to think of this is every time you have a supply and demand model, it's going to start off with two axes, all right? You've got a y-axis and an x-axis. And every single time quantity goes on the x-axis. So down here we're going to have Q, all right? And since we're dealing with the labor model, the price, which goes on the y-axis, in this case is the wage, so we can call that W, right? And here is, let's say, the demand curve. And we remember it's downward sloping. It's always downward sloping because there's a negative relationship between the wage and the quantity demanded. All right, that's the law of demand. But in essence, it says that the higher the wage that a company or an institution of some kind has to pay its employees, the less jobs are going to be open because it's going to have a harder time affording to be able to pay those employees and still remain profitable. But if the wage goes down, you can see that they're going to have a huge amount of quantity demanded. All right. Now for the supply curve, you get an opposite scenario here. So here's the supply curve. The supply curve retains a positive relationship with the wage and the quantity of labor supplied because, hey, you know, the higher the wage goes, the more people you're going to attract that want to supply their labor and get those high salaries, all right? So let's take a look at a couple of extreme examples. One is if the wage is high, so let's call this WH for high wage. And we can see that this point here, that's the quantity of labor demanded. But how much is supplied, you can see that you go all the way out to the supply curve to do that. And that's the quantity supplied. And here you can see there's definitely way more people that want to supply their labor than there are job openings available or people that want to hire those individuals. And this is where we get this, surplus of labor, all right? We can also think of this as unemployment if you want, but we're going to have another chapter on unemployment itself that we're going to talk about in detail. But what this is going to do is anytime you have a surplus of something, it's going to motivate the price to start to come down, right? When you've got too much of something, how do you get rid of it if you're selling it? If you want to sell something very quickly, you have to lower the price, right? And as the wage goes down, you can see that two things happen. These points, they get closer to each other, all right? So as we move down, both curves, you're going to keep moving down until there's no until there's no surplus left. And that only happens right here at the equilibrium, right? And let's use a different color for that. And that is what we call our equilibrium. Usually we would like to put an asterisk there. And this is the quantity supplied, the quantity of nurses in this case, or any worker, if you will, in equilibrium. Right. So that was essentially figure 4.2. The one thing I wanted to get into was the curve shifting. Right. So there's a couple of nice tables in the textbook. So you've got factors. This is table 4.2. These are factors that can shift demand, and this is something you might want to really take a close look at so that you can kind of understand what causes the demand curves to shift, and it lists all of them there. It's kind of pretty convenient. All right, so let's go over again figure 4.3. So this one is the, let's say this is the, let's look at figure 4.3 panel A. So again, I'm always going to start with a new demand and supply model for the labor market. And so when I do that, I'm going to draw my axes. I'm going to put my quantity on the x-axis, my wage on the y-axis. I'm going to have a demand curve, and I'm going to have a supply curve. And where they intersect with each other, that's the first, or the original, equilibrium. We can call that W star, we can think of it as 0 for time period 0, which is like immediate. And we can call this Q star 0. Okay? So let's think of this as low skill labor, right? Okay, and the shock that happens is there is a technological change, right? And because this is low-skilled labor, we're going to assume that that's going to decrease the demand for low-skilled labor. And that's primarily the example that we like to use in economics is one of, let's say, for example, automation. An ATM machine maybe decrease the amount of bank tellers that a bank needed at some point. So that's a pretty good example of that, right? So it decreases the low skill labor demand. That's going to shift the demand curve to the left. Okay. So if we do that, we're going to get the following. We'll have, let's call this D, D1 if this was D0. All right, so 1 comes after 0. And now a couple of things happen. So we see that at W star 0, now the quantity of labor demanded is here, but the quantity of labor supplied is still here. You almost have to try to ignore the old demand curve because it's changed. And you can see things are a little out of whack now. That equilibrium is no longer, the equilibrium should be somewhere around there, right? But we don't immediately just jump there. A couple things have to move the price down or the wage down, right? So here, once again, this is the quantity of labor demanded in time period 1, so we can put a QD1 there. And this is no longer Q star. It is the quantity of labor supplied in time period 1. And now you can see once again, just like the panel that we just did, the quantity supplied is greater than the quantity demanded. We once again have a surplus. That's a surplus there. And what happens with surpluses, so well, let's write this down so we keep track of everything. So at W star 0, the quantity QD1 is less than QS1, which means we have a surplus, and the equilibrium wage is going to start to fall. So W star is going to start to fall, all right? And how far is it going to fall? It's going to fall until we reach our new equilibrium. So that's going to happen right over here. And I'm running out of room because I'm writing a lot. So let's call this W star, I don't know, we could call it W star 2. And then let's call this, I'll just put an arrow here so that we can annotate it, Q star 2. Okay, so it's gonna, W star is gonna fall until the quantity demanded is equal to the quantity supplied is equal to Q star 2. All right. So overall, what's happened with low skilled labor? We get a decrease in equilibrium quantity, right? Let me do this in a different color so you can clearly see it. So we have a decrease in equilibrium quantity. So there's less low skilled labor hired. You can see the equilibrium went from here to here, just to the left. And we can see that the wage has fallen. All right. So we're going to conclude that Q star has gone down and W star has gone down. All right. I do expect you to be able to keep track of all of this. So it's not enough at this level of college to just provide the graph. You have to provide the explanation. As you can see here, I did a pretty brief explanation. This isn't a creative writing class, so I'm not expecting paragraphs. In fact, I would prefer if you abbreviated your writing so I can kind of really get to the heart of the way your mind works about this, so I can diagnose any gaps in your knowledge base. All right. So hopefully that makes a little bit more sense than just the video. So let's think about a. Let me think next. We can do similar type of story with the interest rate if we want, but this should be enough for you to take and apply. It's essentially the exact same pattern. You're just going to apply it somewhere else. All right. But let's do, I'd like to do something with maybe a price floor or price ceiling. Well, let's try that. So let's try doing an example with a price floor. And the example we always like to use is that of the minimum wage. So let's put quantity down here, wage up here. We've got the demand for labor, and we've got the supply for labor. And we have our intersection where the equilibrium is. Let's call this Q star 0 and W star 0. And let's say that the government imposes a minimum wage that's up here. All right, so let's say this is the wage, and we'll put a little MIN to show that it's the minimum wage. And that's where it is. It is a floor because, as you can see, the equilibrium wants to go below it. But the minimum wage is not going to allow that to happen. Much the same way the floor under your feet do not allow you to fall into your basement. Okay? So here what we're going to get is, you can see that the this is the quantity of labor demanded. This is the quantity of labor supplied. When we have a minimum wage that's above the equilibrium, you're always going to end up with a surplus of employment or labor, right? Now, hypothetically, what would happen if the minimum wage was down here? Would it really matter for us? Not really. This minimum wage doesn't really bind. And the reason it doesn't bind is because the equilibrium already is above it. So the minimum wage doesn't really matter. It's not doing anything. It's just sitting there. All right. That's like saying, having the minimum wage equal to 0, essentially. No one works for free. So just having the minimum wage low like this, it's not really going to change the market at all. All right. So the key here is, for minimum wages to work, they have to be above the equilibrium. All right. So just keep that in mind. There's got to be a little bit of space there. All right. Let's do one last example with financial capital. And that should give you enough to work on when I assign some assigned problems. So let's go ahead and graph a market here for financial capital. All right, so now we're going to put quantity of financial capital there, but again, don't forget what the price is in the financial market. It's the interest rate, capital R. All right, and let's put our demand curve and our supply curve. So, and let's write down financial market. All right, so let's say that how about more people would like to purchase, would like to purchase a home using a mortgage. So for those of you who don't know, a mortgage is an instrument where a bank will essentially pay for your house, and then you are required over a specific period of time to pay the bank back. Usually the bank is going to charge you an interest rate that, they're not just going to lend you the money for free. So you have to, it's kind of like you're borrowing the money from us, so we're going to charge you a rental rate, right? And that's just the interest rate, okay? But what happens if the amount of people that want to do this, what happens if that increases so you have more people wanting to go out and buy a house and they want more mortgages? Well, what that's going to do is there's going to be a demand for financial capital. There's going to be a demand for that borrowing, and that's going to shift the demand curve to the right. So the increase in the number of borrowers shifts demand curve to the right. Okay, so we can get something like this. Let me put a 0 there because now it's the demand curve that's shifting. All right, so we're going to have something like this here, D1. Okay. Oh, and whoops, you see what I did here? I put W star. I'm so used to writing W that's wrong. This should be R star. My apologies, but let me kind of bold that up a little bit. All right. Okay, so at R star 0, what's the quantity demanded and what's the quantity supplied? Because we know now that the demand curve has changed, we have to ignore the old demand curve. So you kind of see the equilibrium is up this way, all right? So now how do we show, though, we have to prove it to ourselves that the interest rate's going to rise? Okay, well, we have to look at the argument about a shortage versus a surplus, all right? So here, this is the new quantity demanded. So at R star 0, the quantity demanded goes on to the new demand curve. And that's going to be down here. This is QD1. And again, the supply curve hasn't changed, so this is not Q star anymore. This is Q, the quantity supplied one. You can see here, now we've got a shortage. Right? So at R star, QD1 is greater than QS1, which is a shortage. All right. What happens with shortages? Interest rate will rise until Q, the quantity demanded is equal to the quantity supplied is equal to Q star 2, which is right over here. All right, so that's Q star 2. And this is R star 2. So the interest rate has risen, and we have more people borrowing money, so Q star has also increased. So Q star has gone up, and R star has also gone up. Okay? All right, hopefully that gives you a little bit of material to work with and might clarify some of the things we talked about in the slideshow. All right, once again, email me with questions. And if you do email me with questions, I do appreciate it if you make questions specific so that I can really understand where your problem lies. Open-ended questions make me, I don't know, I've got to dig and figure out where you're running into problems. So if you can tell me what you've done and where you've gotten stuck, that's super helpful. All right, everybody, hopefully this video is helpful. Till the next one.